"You can't even say the wine's name," said the CEO Millionaire with an arrogant smile on his lips. The waitress looked at him calmly, replied in French, and raised her glass with elegance. The entire room fell silent. That night, the one who got served a glass of shame was him. Support the channel by leaving your like and comment, and let's get into our story. The crystal glass slid a few inches across the tray, but Sydney caught it with a quick, almost imperceptible movement. She didn't even have to look to make sure. The balance came from habit. 3 years serving at Pacific Ember, the most prestigious seaside restaurant on the Embarcadero, had trained her body to stay in control, even when everything else was shaking inside. "Table 12 asked for another round of sparkling wine," said Lila, one of the senior servers, passing by with her red hair pulled into a tight bun. Sydney nodded with a slight smile, even though her shoulders were tense from the packed evening. The breeze from the bay drifted through the restaurant's massive glass windows, carrying the salty scent of the sea and the distant hum of San Francisco's nightlife. The dining room was at its peak, soft lighting, quiet laughter, artisanal ceramic plates arriving with near-choreographed precision. She was crossing the floor when Julio's deep, steady voice stopped her. "Sid," he called, pulling her aside. "Table 16, the guy in the dark suit, Bastien Rowe." She frowned slightly. Bastien Rowe? The name sounds familiar? One of the biggest investors in luxury hospitality on the West Coast. He also owns the Lark and Rowe hotel chain. Just made it onto Forbes's list. Sydney discreetly glanced over at the indicated table. Hard to miss. The man at the head drew attention without trying. Tall, broad shoulders beneath a navy blue suit that probably cost more than 3 months' rent. Dark brown hair, purposefully tousled, like he'd just walked out of a photo shoot. A strong jawline, eyes steady and calm. He seemed always in control, not because he spoke often, but because others seemed to wait for what he'd say. Around him, 3 other men laughed together. 2 were clearly foreign, with thick accents coloring their English between sips of wine. The 4th looked younger, probably an assistant. "He's entertaining international clients," Julio continued. "Important ones. Make sure everything is perfect." Sydney nodded, adjusting her black tie over her white shirt. Perfection was the bare minimum she allowed herself to offer, regardless of the client's last name. She approached the table with confident steps, heels barely tapping the light wood floor. She stopped beside Bastien, standing straight, her expression professional. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Pacific Ember. May I offer you something to drink while you look over the menu?" Bastien's gaze lifted slowly from the wine list to meet hers. It was a measuring look, though not exactly disrespectful. He seemed to be placing her, calculating whether she was just a well-trained server or something more. Sydney knew that look well, and from the first glance, she knew he was used to commanding attention. "Still water for the table," he said with a short nod, then turned to his guests. "And let's start with wine. Something that matches the view, gentlemen?" The foreigners laughed, approving the idea. Bastien flipped through the wine list like he was inspecting a piece of art or choosing a jewel. "Bring a bottle of Chateau Margaux 2010 vintage," he announced, his tone carrying a slightly forced French accent. Sydney didn't react. She kept her expression neutral, though she immediately recognized the technical misstep. A bold red wine for a hot night, likely paired with seafood. Poor choice. But her job wasn't to correct. "Excellent choice, sir. I'll return shortly." She walked away discreetly, heading toward the refrigerated wine cellar. Julio intercepted her on the way. "Margaux?" he asked, frowning. "Before they even order food?" "The customer's always right. Isn't that what you always say?" she replied with a half smile. "Yeah, but in this heat, he wants to impress, not pair. I'm just going to get it." As she opened the cellar with the electronic code, she mentally calculated the bottle's price, nearly $2,000, more than she earned in 2 months. Some people lived on an entirely different scale. When she returned to the table, the atmosphere had shifted. Bastien was speaking more animatedly, gesturing with the ease of someone used to being at the center of attention. He was talking about turning a failed hotel in Carmel into one of the coast's most exclusive destinations. "The secret," he said, fingers tapping on his glass, is knowing what people want before they even realize it themselves. Sydney waited politely for a pause. Have you gentlemen decided what you'd like for dinner? Bastien didn't even look at her. Not yet. But could we get the chef's recommendations to pair with the wine I chose? Certainly. The chef suggests our herb-crusted grilled salmon or the lobster risotto with Meyer lemon. Both pair well with warmer evenings. One of the foreign guests leaned forward. The fish sounds great. Is it fresh? All of our seafood is delivered daily by local fishermen, Sydney replied, maintaining her fluent tone, now in Portuguese. The man smiled, pleased. I'll handle the ordering, Bastien cut in, taking back control of the conversation. 4 starters to share: burrata, carpaccio, fresh oysters, and grilled shrimp. Sydney jotted everything down quickly. She could feel his eyes on her again, but this time it was more pointed, as if he were trying to figure something out about her. Julio arrived at the table with the bottle, presenting the label to Bastien. The businessman went through the full performance, held the wine against the light, swirled it, inhaled deeply, then took a tiny sip. Excellent, he declared. Go ahead and pour for the others. As the guests toasted, Bastien turned back to her. And for the main course, we'll go with the salmon for the guests. I'll have the filet mignon with red wine sauce. Sydney nodded. Would you like a side with that? We have a truffled olive oil mashed potato that pairs beautifully with the filet. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. You know about wine pairing? Just the basics, I've learned while working here. One of the foreigners raised his glass. This wine is magnificent. I'm impressed an American restaurant carries these French vintages. Bastien smiled, visibly pleased. The American culinary scene has evolved a lot. It's no longer just burgers and beer. Then, turning back to Sydney, he said in French, Chateau Margaux is one of the best wines from Bordeaux. I probably can't even pronounce the name properly, can you? The comment wasn't loud. It was aimed just at her. The foreign guests didn't understand, but they sensed the subtle shift in the air. Sydney hesitated briefly. She could have smiled and moved on, swallowed it like so many times before, but not this time. Actually, sir, she replied smoothly, still in French, Chateau Margaux is a Premier Grand Cru Classé from the Bordeaux region. It's an elegant wine with silky tannins, although perhaps a bit intense for seafood on a night as warm as this one. Silence. Bastien's eyes narrowed slightly. The smile he wore faltered. Sydney continued, her tone impeccably polite. To pair with seafood and higher temperatures, perhaps a Pouligny Montrachet or a Chablis Grand Cru would be equally sophisticated and more appropriate. The men at the table didn't understand the words, but they noticed something had shifted. The energy, Bastien's demeanor, the brief moment of disarmament. He was looking at her, but no longer with the same superior tone. There was something new in his gaze. Surprise, yes, but also respect. You speak French? He asked, his voice less sharp. I lived in Paris for 2 years, Sydney replied, returning to her formal tone. Excuse me, I'll be back shortly with the starters. And she walked away from the table with the same elegance she had maintained all evening. But inside, something had shifted. Not because she had dared to correct him, but because she had allowed herself to show who she was and had been heard. In the kitchen, Julio was waiting for her. What was that about? Just a customer realizing that not every book should be judged by its cover, she replied, handing the order to the chef. Or a waitress by her uniform. He's here again, and this time he's alone. Julio said it quietly, close to Sydney's ear, as she finished aligning the silverware at table 20. She looked up at the maitre d' with a furrowed brow, not immediately understanding. Who? Bastien Rowe, table 8, reserved an hour ago, arrived 5 minutes ago, and he specifically asked for you. The name made Sydney freeze for a split second. The last time she'd heard that name, he had left the dining room at Pacific Ember with an unreadable expression, part shame, part surprise, maybe even fascination. Her response, delivered in technical French and a firm tone, still echoed in the minds of many on the staff, but she hadn't expected him to return, much less to ask for her. He's alone, she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. Completely, Julio replied. And no suit today. He's dressed casually, but still has that same presence, like the whole dining room belongs to him. She took a deep breath. She didn't quite know what to think. She'd spent the last few days avoiding thoughts of that night, but part of her kept replaying the moment she corrected his wine choice and watched the silent impact it had. Now, he was back. Not with a group, not with a date. Alone. And he wanted to speak with her. "Do you want me to switch tables with Aaron?" Julio offered, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "No need. I'll take it," Sydney said, adjusting her bow tie with her fingers. "He's just another customer." But as she walked toward table 8, her stomach twisted in a way that didn't usually happen with just another customer. Bastien was flipping through the dark leather menu when she arrived. He wore a light blue shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, no tie, no blazer. Even so, he looked like he belonged there, relaxed, but with the quiet authority of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. More than that, he seemed completely comfortable alone. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't pretending to wait for someone. He was simply present. "Good evening, Mr. Rowe. Welcome back to Pacific Ember," she greeted him, keeping a professional tone. He looked up immediately, and when their eyes met, there was a different kind of spark. A recognition, a quiet satisfaction that caught Sydney off guard. "Good evening, Sydney," he replied, saying her name like it was something familiar. She frowned, not hiding her surprise. "I don't remember giving you my name." "You didn't," he admitted, resting his elbows on the table with a slight smile. "I asked Julio. I hope you don't mind. I promise I'm not usually intrusive." Sydney stayed quiet for a moment, assessing whether this was a rehearsed charm or genuine sincerity. There was no arrogance in his tone. He seemed careful. "Not at all. Can I get you something to drink while you decide on dinner?" "Actually," he closed the menu and looked at her with focus. "I was thinking I'd trust your judgment tonight. What would you recommend for an evening like this?" She hesitated. Customers rarely asked her opinion without a condescending tone, but from him it sounded different, honest. "That depends on what you're planning to have. But to start, I'd suggest the Matador Brut Cava from Santa Barbara. A dry, sparkling wine with good acidity and floral notes. Excellent for opening the palate." "Perfect," he said without hesitation. "And for dinner?" "The catch of the day is fresh grouper. It came in this morning from the Half Moon Bay harbor. The chef prepares it with herbs from our urban garden and mashed Peruvian parsnips." Bastien nodded slowly. "Grouper sounds excellent. I'll have that. I trust your choice." She jotted it down, still trying to make sense of what exactly was happening. Bastien didn't seem to be flirting, nor trying to win something back. He seemed interested, genuinely interested. "I'll bring your sparkling wine in just a moment." On her way to the bar, Sydney could feel his gaze on her back. Not the same look from the week before, that quiet, hierarchical evaluation. This was different. She couldn't quite explain it, but she could feel it. It wasn't empty desire, it was curiosity. Julio found her as she waited for the bartender to open the bottle. "Everything okay?" "Totally normal," she said with a subtle smile. "He seems less like a jerk." "He does. And he's looking at you like he's waiting for something." "I don't know what he's waiting for, but I'll serve the wine and leave the table. That's it." She returned to the table with the bottle. Bastien was admiring the view of the bay as she approached. "Your sparkling wine, Mr. Rowe." "Please call me Bastien," he said with a modest smile. "Mr. makes me feel like my father." Sydney hesitated for a moment, weighing it. There were unspoken rules about how to address certain clients, but something in the way he asked, without entitlement, without superiority, made her concede. "As you wish, Bastien." She poured with precision. He brought the glass to his lips, tasted carefully. "Excellent. Far more interesting than any Prosecco I would have chosen. We have amazing producers here in California. They just need more visibility." He nodded. "Have you worked here long?" 3 years. I started shortly after coming back from Paris. "Paris, did you study cuisine there?" The question caught her off guard. Customers rarely wanted to know that, and if they did, it wasn't with that tone of genuine curiosity. My aunt is a chef at a fusion restaurant in the Marais. I spent 2 years living with her, learning everything I could. Your aunt must be an extraordinary woman. She is. She taught me that food and wine aren't just about flavor, but story, intention. Bastien looked at her for a moment, and Sydney had the impression he was searching for something, a deeper layer maybe. This sparkling wine, he said, shifting the subject, surprised me. I never thought something made here could have so much finesse. Many still associate quality with foreign names, but we have incredible terroirs here with climate and soil similar to Europe's best regions. What we're missing is recognition. He chuckled, a low, satisfied sound. You really know what you're talking about. There's passion in it. I love what I do. She was about to step away to give him space when he stopped her with a gentle hand gesture. Sydney, can I ask you something? She raised an eyebrow, cautious. Depends on the question. Fair enough, he smiled. Do you like working here? The simple question carried unexpected weight. Sydney thought for a moment. I do. It's demanding, but I learn a lot, and it helps pay for college. College for culinary arts. I'm in my final year. He nodded like it made perfect sense. So it's more than a job. It's a step toward your dream. Exactly. She was just about to walk away when he spoke again, softer this time. You surprised me, Sydney. Last time. Not just with the French or the wine, but with the way you kept your composure. You didn't humiliate me, even though you had every right to. She didn't answer right away. We don't always have the luxury of reacting how we want to, but I can assure you it was intentional, every word. He smiled again, a different smile. Without the polish of a successful businessman, it was human. I deserved it. She looked him in the eyes, unflinching. Yes, you did. He laughed quietly, and she felt that something about that exchange had pulled them out of their comfort zones. He used to control, she to shielding herself, and now they were on neutral ground. I'll let you enjoy your dinner. I'll be back with your entree shortly. And as she walked away, she felt like something had been left hanging in the air. A pause, a semicolon, not a period. In the kitchen, she handed the order to the chef and took a deep breath. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at her, like he was truly seeing her. He was just a customer, but something about tonight said it wouldn't stay that way. Not anymore. The business card was still sitting on the wooden kitchen table when Maya pointed to it with her chin, without taking her eyes off the mug of tea she was holding in both hands. So, are you going to call him? Sydney didn't answer right away. She grabbed the dish towel hanging on the stove and started drying a cup that wasn't even wet. I didn't say I would, she murmured, keeping her gaze fixed on the blue ceramic. I'm just still considering it. Considering what, exactly? Maya raised an eyebrow, her tone laced with irony. He's a restaurant client, Sid. A millionaire who could literally have dinner with any woman in the city, models, actresses, and whoever else. Thanks for the vote of confidence. That's not what I meant. I'm just trying to save you from an unnecessary cliché. Sydney set the cup down in the sink with a bit more force than she intended. She turned around, arms crossed. You think I don't know that? That I haven't thought about all of this since the moment he came back to the restaurant? Of course you do, Maya sighed, setting the mug down and leaning her elbows on the table. And that's exactly why I'm surprised that card is still there. If he were just another arrogant rich guy, you would have thrown it out already. The piece of elegant white paper, with clean and minimalist typography, seemed to take on physical weight in the middle of the table. Bastien Row, Larkin Row Hospitality Group. No handwritten phone number, no notes, nothing but a subtle yet striking presence. He was different, Sydney finally admitted, the second time. Different how? She paused for a moment, trying to organize the tangle of impressions still floating in her mind. The way he listened to every recommendation, the way he said her name, how he seemed genuinely curious about her background, about Paris, about gastronomy. There were no empty promises, no over-the-top compliments, just attention. "He listened to me," she said at last, her tone calmer. "And not like someone pretending to care. He actually paid attention. He respected my opinions. He apologized for the arrogant comment he made the first night." Maya pursed her lips. "Okay, that already puts him ahead of about 90% of the guys I've dated. But it's still not enough to justify an after-hours invite, don't you think?" Sydney sat down across from her friend, resting her elbows on the table and massaging her temples with her fingers. "I don't know if I want to say yes, but I also don't know why I'm still thinking about it. It's not like I'm waiting for something to happen. I have a plan, a path. This kind of distraction just complicates things." Maya nodded slowly. "You're not someone who jumps in without thinking. That's why you're going to be an amazing chef. But sometimes a distraction can be interesting, as long as you know how to come back to center." "That's exactly the problem. I don't know if he's a distraction or a detour." The silence between them was filled only by the distant hum of the city drifting in through the cracked window. The muffled sounds of horns and footsteps on the sidewalk blended with the lingering scent of old coffee in the air. "I saw the way he looked at you," Maya said after a while. "And it didn't seem like just physical interest. It looked like he was trying to figure out what to do with what he was feeling, like it was new to him." Sydney didn't respond. She just kept staring at the card, thinking about the question she hadn't been able to silence since that night. Why would someone like Bastien Rowe return to the restaurant alone, and why would he ask for her? It was easy to imagine a man like him, living in excess and vanity, surrounded by people who said yes to everything. But there was something out of place in the way he behaved, as if he were trying to find something off script, something he hadn't written into his own story. And somehow, she was part of that. "Anyway," Maya continued, "if you do decide to talk to him, keep your feet on the ground. Don't confuse dreams with loneliness, okay?" "I'm not lonely. I'm just getting ahead of it, because he looks like the kind of trouble who knows how to wear a well-tailored blazer." Sydney laughed. A light, relieved laugh, like she'd only needed that to release the weight on her shoulders. She got up, picked up the card from the table, and tucked it into the drawer of the bookshelf, between culinary course manuals and unpaid bills. "For now, he stays here, out of sight." "Out of sight but in your head," Maya teased, flashing her a playful look. Sydney just shook her head, grabbing her backpack. It was time to head to class. The next day was filled with knife skills, a lesson on premium cuts, and an exhausting lab in the college's test kitchen. Even so, amid undercooked steaks and sauce reductions, Bastien's image still resurfaced. The way he smiled after tasting the sparkling wine, the sincerity on his face when he apologized, the calm tone almost vulnerable. That night, during her shift at Pacific Ember, she caught herself glancing at the door more often than she'd like to admit. Every time someone in a blazer walked in, her body tensed for a second. But Bastien didn't show up. Not that night. Not the next. By the end of the week, when the restaurant was buzzing and Sydney was bouncing between the dining room and the patio, her mind was finally too busy to dwell on unmade invitations or unanswered questions. "Sydney, table 5's asking about the house wine," Aaron called out as he passed her with a basket of bread. "I'm on it," she replied, grabbing the right bottle with practiced ease. As she served the customers with her usual precision, something inside her began to realign. As if Bastien's silence had pushed everything back into place. Maybe it had just been an unusual night. Maybe he came back on impulse, embarrassed by his own behavior. Maybe he'd already forgotten, and that was good. That made things simpler. After her shift, she walked to the bus stop with her headphones in, tuning out the city around her. The night breeze was cool, and for a few minutes, the world felt quiet. When she got home, she took a long shower, made herself some tea, and sat on her bed with her laptop on her lap. She needed to finish a report on cooking techniques. But first, her eyes landed on the bookshelf. The drawer where the card was tucked away seemed to pulse quietly, as if it knew she was still thinking about him. She took a deep breath. She wasn't going to touch it now. She wouldn't call, she wouldn't text, and she definitely wasn't going to say yes to a date with a customer, even one who apologized sincerely, had attentive eyes, and asked real questions. She had a plan. And he, however intriguing, wasn't part of it. Tomorrow, she thought, everything goes back to normal. That's what she kept telling herself. But a part of her, stubborn and nearly imperceptible, knew there was something different in the way he looked at her. And maybe normal had already changed. "There's a woman waiting for you at the front desk. She says she's your aunt." Sydney stopped in the middle of the locker room, her white shirt still half unbuttoned, frowning at the sound of Julio's voice. He stood slightly leaned in through the cracked door, wearing a curious expression, as if he knew he was about to deliver some unexpected news. "My aunt," Sydney repeated, her fingers pausing on the button she was about to fasten. "What do you mean? Who?" "Elisa. She said she just got in from New York. Very elegant. And she asked about you like she had every right to just stroll into the restaurant." The surprise made Sydney's heart beat faster. Elisa Carter, the woman who years ago had opened the doors of Paris to her with an apron, a passport and a recipe notebook, her mentor, her role model. But the last time they'd spoken via video, Elisa hadn't mentioned a single word about coming to California. She quickly finished getting dressed, twisted her hair into a simple bun, and walked briskly down the hallway toward the front desk, her steps quick and anxious. When she turned the corner, there she was, standing tall with the same elegant posture as always, short grey hair, and a black scarf that contrasted sharply with her impeccably tailored dress. A wide, confident smile lit up her face the moment she saw her. "Aunt Elisa," Sydney exclaimed, crossing the lobby to hug her. "What are you doing here? Why didn't you say anything?" "I wanted to surprise you," her aunt replied, holding her tightly in her arms, "and fate played along. I got a last-minute invitation to be a judge at a food festival here in San Francisco. Guess who it came from?" Sydney pulled back just enough to look at her aunt's face, suspicious. "Who?" "A certain Bastian Rowe. Ring any bells?" She felt the heat rise to her cheeks. It was impossible to hide. Even hearing his name from someone else made her skin react. "He invited you?" "Yes. And when I mentioned that my niece was a chef here, he stopped immediately and asked, 'Sydney Carter?' I said yes, the sparkle in his eyes, and it was instant." Sydney looked away for a moment, trying to process that information. Bastian not only remembered her, but had spoken enthusiastically to her aunt? "What did he say?" she asked, in a more subdued tone. "That you speak French flawlessly, that you have a refined palate, and that he would very much like you to attend a tasting event he's organizing tomorrow night at the hotel in Sausalito." "An event?" "Exclusive tasting of American wines, independent producers, new labels, a big deal. Only special guests, critics, sommeliers, chefs. And now, you." "He asked you to invite me?" "He told me he would be honored if you came. His exact words. He added that it would be an excellent learning opportunity for someone like you, with potential." Those were his words. Sydney stepped back, arms crossed, staring at a vague spot on the wall. Something inside her tightened. The invitation sounded almost too professional, almost too perfect. "And what do you think it is, Aunt? A second intention kind of invite?" "Sweetheart," Elisa replied, stepping forward and taking her hands. "I'm a woman in my 50s with an entire career spent in restaurants and professional kitchens. I know when a man is charmed, but I also know when there's real respect. And I can tell you, he seems genuinely impressed by who you are." "Impressed? Or just curious?" Sydney countered, restless. "Because men like him have access to everything, to everyone. It's easy to be impressed when you live in a bubble of flattery." "Maybe. But even so, he talked about you like someone who'd been surprised. And you know what stood out to me the most?" "What?" "He didn't mention your face or your smile or your looks. He talked about your knowledge, your mastery of wine, the calm with which you corrected him, the impact you had on him, without raising your voice, without losing control. That, Sydney, is not something a man like him says lightly." Sydney stayed quiet. Her aunt's words hit like sledgehammers against her defenses. Slowly, a part of her, the part trained not to believe in pretty words from powerful men, began to waver. "Is it a public event?" she asked, trying to change the subject. Yes, but private, strict guest list, and he made me a judge on the panel. He's presenting the new wine menu he's developing for the Lark and Row hotels, and yes, he said he would love for you to be there too, if you're willing. Sydney ran a hand over her face, sighing. I have a shift tomorrow. Dinner service starts at 7. I already spoke to Julio, Elisa said with a smile. He said he can rearrange the schedule. Beatrice needs Sunday off and can cover your shift if you swap with her. He understands it's an important professional opportunity. Sydney blinked, surprised. You two planned everything? I just took advantage of what the universe was already handing you, darling. Now, it's your choice. She looked at her aunt again. There was a soft light in her eyes, a blend of affection, pride, and anticipation. Elisa was never one to interfere in Sydney's decisions. She always supported, but left the choices up to her. The very fact that she was here in person sent a clear message. Something unusual was happening. Hey, if I go, Sydney said slowly. It's not a date, it's not personal. Of course not, Elisa replied, raising her hands in a mock, innocent gesture. It's networking, pure learning, a professional environment. The teasing smile on her aunt's lips made her laugh, despite the knot still sitting in her stomach. You're impossible. And you're brilliant. You got here with grit, knowledge, and humility. There's nothing wrong with walking through an open door, as long as you keep both feet on the ground. Are you going with me? Up to the door. After that, you walk in alone, like you always have. Sydney nodded. The thought of Bastien now came back with force, but seen in a new light. Not just the confident, elegant man who had returned to the restaurant to talk, but someone who valued what she represented, who remembered details, who had reached out to her aunt, who was organizing an event like that, and still wanted her to be there. She looked at Elisa once more. What time does it start? The event? 8 p.m., rooftop of Lark and Row in Sausalito. Bay view, sunset, incredible wines, and, of course, a man who respects you. Sydney rolled her eyes but smiled. All right, I'll go. Excellent. Now come with me to the kitchen. I want to see this famous operation you run with such elegance. The two walked together through the dining room, between tables already being set for the evening, rushed waiters and plates being assembled. Sydney still felt the unrest deep in her chest, but now there was something else too. Curiosity. A subtle thread of anticipation. Normal, it seemed, was definitely beginning to shift. Sydney's heel made a sharp sound against the dark hardwood floor as she stepped out of the Uber in front of the Lark and Row Hotel in Sausalito. The driver wished her a good evening, but she barely heard him. She was too focused on keeping her posture steady, even though her heart was pounding as if it might burst. The hotel's facade was elegant in an understated way. Expansive windows, soft lighting, and wooden accents gave the place a welcoming aura, even with its evident luxury. Across the street, the sea reflected the lights from distant boats, as if the entire event had been staged just for her. You look absolutely stunning, Elisa commented beside her. Sydney shot her a mildly reproachful glance. This isn't a runway show, Aunt Elisa. Of course not. It's just a high-end culinary event with the elite of the national wine industry. But if it were a runway, you'd still be ready. Elisa smiled and gently squeezed her niece's arm before leading her inside. The hotel lobby was quiet, decorated in neutral tones and pieces of contemporary art. Guests passed in small groups, all dressed in a kind of sophisticated informality. Clean-cut dresses, blazers without ties, restrained laughter. The kind of people who knew exactly what they were doing there and made it look effortless. Sydney adjusted her navy blue dress at the hips, feeling both out of place and intensely alive. She had never attended anything like this. At the restaurant, her uniform was her armor. Here, it was just her story, her knowledge, her presence. Shall we? Elisa gestured toward the elevators. Are you coming up with me? Just to the top, then I'll let you fly solo. Oh, and be prepared. The sommelier is French, gruff, but if you strike the right tone, he melts. Sydney let out a nervous laugh. Sure, a grumpy Frenchman, easy. The elevator rose silently to the top floor. As soon as the doors opened, a soft, fragrant breeze swept into the space. The hotel's rooftop was breathtaking. An open-air venue with a panoramic view of the San Francisco Bay, decorated with delicate lights strung from invisible wires and white and green floral arrangements on light wood tables. About 40 people moved around the space, all holding wine glasses, speaking in low voices and laughing between sips. In the center, round tables displayed carefully arranged bottles with discrete labels, signaling different wine-producing regions of California. Sydney took a deep breath. She was about to step into a new world, and she didn't know if she belonged, until she heard the voice. "You came." She turned slowly and found Bastien just a few steps away. He wore a dark blue linen suit, a white shirt with no tie, and his usual serene posture. But there was something softer in his expression now, something personal. "My aunt can be very persuasive," she replied with a slight smile. "A family trait, it seems," he said, his eyes holding hers a second longer than necessary. "I'll leave you two to talk," said Elisa, leaning in to kiss her niece on the cheek. "I've got judges to meet and wines to taste." Sydney nodded, and her aunt disappeared into the crowd with the ease of someone who knew that kind of environment well. Bastien pointed to a nearby table with a small wine selection. "Would you like to see the lineup before the official presentation?" "I'd love to." They walked side by side between the tables. The initial conversation was about the displayed labels, small wineries, new ventures, organic production. But soon the discussion deepened. "The idea behind the event," Bastien explained, "is to show that California has more to offer than Napa and Sonoma. There are emerging regions with tremendous potential, but without the necessary prestige, they're never included on fine dining wine lists. You want to change that? I do. I want to redesign the wine lists for all my hotels. Move away from French and Italian labels, not out of disdain, but because we have our own identity here. We just need the courage to back that choice." She looked at him, surprised by the passion in his voice. He wasn't just a businessman promoting a product. He was someone defending a personal cause. "What made you want to do this?" He hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a quieter tone. "My grandfather had a small vineyard in Healdsburg, nothing big. Her family-run operation, but with excellent quality. He sold to local restaurants, proud of his work, but he could never break into the bigger market. Foreign names always dominated the menus." "Does the vineyard still exist?" "It was sold after he passed away. I was a teenager then, but 2 years ago I bought the property back. And this bottle here," he picked up an amber-colored bottle with a subtle label, "is the first wine bottled there since then." Sydney accepted the glass the sommelier handed her. She swirled the liquid gently, inhaled and tasted. The flavor exploded in layers, ripe fruit, earthy notes, a long, memorable finish. "It's wonderful," she said, impressed. "It has structure, but it's delicate. And more than anything, it has identity." Bastien smiled, a different smile, not one of confidence, but of gratitude. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." The conversation flowed with disarming ease. Sydney learned that he had studied architecture before going into business, that he hated cookie-cutter formulas, and that he had a deep dislike for empty conventions. And he learned that she had taught herself about wine in her aunt's kitchen, reading used oenology books and tasting leftovers from tastings to train her palate. "You're self-taught." "I'm a survivor," Sydney corrected with a short smile. "I grew up knowing that if I wanted something, I'd have to build it from scratch." "Maybe that's why you caught me off guard," he said. "I thought I knew every kind of reaction. You gave me a new one." She looked away for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment intensify. A couple passed by, nodding at Bastien, but he didn't turn. He kept watching her as if the entire room had ceased to exist. "I don't know what you want from me," Sydney said honestly. "I'm not exactly sure either," he replied. "I just know you make me want to be more honest. With myself." She didn't answer. There was nothing to say right then, only feel. "Would you like to go upstairs?" he asked. "I want to show you something. A special space. Private. It's not part of the event, but I'd like you to see it." Sydney nodded, surprised at how easy it was to say yes. As they climbed a narrow side staircase, they left behind the murmur of voices, the polite laughter and the clinking of glasses. It felt like time had slowed, like the night had carved out a moment just for them. At the top, they found a rooftop garden, intimate, quiet, lit by small embedded lights among aromatic plants. A round table stood in the center, 2 glasses already set, and chilling in the ice bucket, a bottle of wine from his grandfather's vineyard. "This is my refuge," Bastien said, "when things get too loud down there. It's beautiful and calm, like you." She sat down, and he did the same. He poured the wine with the patience of someone who knew there was no need to rush. And for a few moments they sat in silence, watching each other, listening to the wind and their own heartbeats. "Thank you for confronting me that first night," he said after a while. "It was the most honest thing anyone said to me in a long time." Sydney raised her glass to her lips, smiled. "Credit goes to the Chateau Margaux." They toasted. The sound of crystal rang softly, like a silent promise, and in that moment, beneath the Sausalito stars, something began to bloom. Not a hasty romance, not a convenient flirtation, but the start of something rare. Respect, curiosity, and maybe the beginning of affection. The morning in Napa Valley began with the scent of damp earth and the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. Sydney took a deep breath as she stepped down from Bastien's grey pickup truck, inhaling the aroma of ripe vineyards. It was still early, but the sun was already peeking over the mountains, casting a golden hue across the vines. She wore dark jeans, worn-out boots, and a plaid shirt tied around her waist. Her hair was pulled back into a makeshift ponytail. For the first time since stepping into Bastien's world, she felt completely at ease. No uniform, no heels, no pressure to look flawless. Just her, the land, and the wine. Bastien got out on the driver's side, opened the back door, and grabbed a box filled with pruning shears, gloves, and small notebooks. He wore a white cotton shirt with rolled-up sleeves and khaki pants stained with dirt, without any aesthetic intention, yet he looked like he belonged there. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, handing her a pair of gloves. "Like a rock," Sydney replied, putting the gloves on and glancing around, fascinated. "This place is bigger than I imagined. 10 productive hectares, half's already been harvested. Today we're heading to the north section, more delicate grapes. I need your opinion on them." "My opinion?" She raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "You have a more intuitive palate than any enologist I've ever hired," he said without hesitation. "I want you to taste straight from the vine. Tell me what you feel." She stared at him for a second, trying to decipher what lay behind such a direct compliment. She found no arrogance, no cheap flirtation, just truth, the kind of truth that didn't need embellishment. "All right, but just so you know, if they're bad, I'll say it. That's exactly why I brought you." They walked side by side to the row of vines stretching like a green wave between gentle hills. Workers were already in the field, harvesting carefully, filling buckets and transporting them in small carts. Some waved respectfully at Bastien, others looked at Sydney with curiosity. She crouched near a vine and carefully snipped off a small bunch. She observed the color, pressed a grape between her fingers, then popped another into her mouth. "Medium acidity, good sweetness," she murmured almost to herself. "But it still needs 2 or 3 more days. The tannin's still a bit green." "I agree," said Bastien, kneeling beside her, "but the others said it was ready." "Then they're rushing, or afraid of getting it wrong." He laughed. "Aren't you afraid?" "I have plenty of fears, but making mistakes isn't one of them." His eyes turned toward her with intensity. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Just watched, as if absorbing more than her words. Sydney looked away, turning her gaze back to the vineyards. "Why did you really bring me here, Bastien?" "I already told you. I need your opinion. I need someone who sees beyond what the data shows, someone who feels." "You have consultants for that? Specialists? People with resumes longer than my school transcripts?" "None of them made me want to change my entire wine list after a 5-minute conversation." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're so dramatic." "Maybe, but not about you." The silence that followed was heavy, not uncomfortable, just full. He was so close. The scent of the earth mingled with her subtle perfume. The two of them sitting among the vines, as if time had slowed down to listen. "When I bought this winery back," he continued, staring at the horizon, "I thought it was just about honoring my grandfather, restoring the family name. But now, I'm not sure. Maybe it's more about finding what I lost." "What did you lose?" "Connection, roots, the truth in things. In business, you get used to wearing armor, and suddenly, you realize you're surrounded by people who serve you but don't know you, who smile but never tell you the truth." She looked sideways at him, her chin resting on her knee. "And you think you know me?" "Not yet, but I want to." The words came without hesitation, firm, masculine, but without pressure. An invitation, not a demand. Sydney stood up, pulled off her glove and wiped her hand on her pants. She needed air. She walked a few yards to the beginning of the trail that led to the small barn on top of the hill. Bastien followed in silence. Inside, the air was cooler. A barrel of oak rested in the corner, along with a row of unlabeled bottles. He opened one with a pocket corkscrew and poured 2 glasses. "This is the first test of the new vintage. It's not finished yet, but I want your opinion." She took a sip, closed her eyes, felt the explosion of flavors. "It's raw but promising. Medium body, soft tannins. It'll improve with a slow fermentation. If you want, I can help with the adjustments." "That's why you're here," he replied, raising his glass. "Because I want this to be as much yours as it is mine." Sydney looked at him. It was no longer just about wine. It was about trust, about partnership. "If we're doing this right," she said, "I want to be part of the whole process, from the soil to the bottle. I want to understand every choice." "Deal." They toasted. And in that simple gesture, something was sealed. In the days that followed, they worked side by side. They cared for the grapes, organized blind tastings, assessed acidity, labeled bottles. At night, they cooked together in the small house next to the vineyard. Nothing fancy. Pasta with a simple sauce, roasted chicken with herbs, and wine, always wine. They talked about childhood, about mistakes. He spoke of lonely years in luxury hotels. She shared stories about double shifts at the restaurant and night classes. They discovered affinities in silence, in glances, in small gestures, like how he always saved the last sip for her, or how she always knew the exact moment to stay quiet and just listen. One of those nights they sat outside, surrounded by the scent of the land and the freshness of the air, the starry sky above, half-full glasses in their hands. "I thought I knew everything about myself," Bastien said, his voice low. "But then you came along and turned everything upside down. And is that a bad thing?" "It's scary, but good." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder for the first time. A small gesture, but it carried more truth than any promise. There, among the vineyards under the stars, with no witnesses, the romance began. No fanfare, no declarations, just presence. And for them, in that moment, that was enough. The wind blew hard through the vineyards as Sydney climbed down from the small tractor, pulling up her shirt sleeve to wipe the sweat from her forehead. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of amber and violet, and the sweet scent of ripe grapes filled the air. The harvest was finally entering the home stretch, and the workers moved quickly, but with the kind of precision only time and experience could teach. She looked around, inhaling deeply. There was dirt under her nails, small wine stains on her sneakers, and her body ached from walking row after row of vines. But there was something deeply comforting about that routine, something that made sense. Bastien appeared a few yards away, coming down the slope with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where to step. He carried a notebook under one arm and 2 bottles of water. He tossed one to her without saying a word. Sydney caught it in the air, smiled, and drank deeply before speaking. "I'm exhausted but satisfied." "That's good," he replied, approaching her. "We're at the best point in the harvest. If we don't mess up now, the vintage is going to be exceptional. The team's in sync. Everyone seems proud to be part of this." Bastien nodded, his eyes sweeping the landscape as if searching for something only he knew. "This place," he began, his voice lower now, "it's becoming bigger than I ever imagined, and you're at the center of it." Sydney lowered the bottle, looking at him directly. "I'm just helping. You had all this before you brought me in. I had land, vines, and memories, but I lacked direction. You know when was the last time I heard real laughter in this field? When I was a kid, with my grandfather. You brought that back. She looked away, not quite sure how to respond. The weight of his words touched her in an unexpected way. It wasn't flattery, it was acknowledgement, and that was rare. They walked side by side to the fermentation shed, where the barrels were already being filled. Along the way, they passed Matteo, the head winemaker, who greeted them with a slight smile. The lot from row 7 is already in the tank. We're starting the natural fermentation today. Sydney nodded. Great. I want to follow that process closely. Matteo looked from Bastien to her, then smiled again, a smile that said much more than a polite gesture. There was no doubt among the winery workers anymore. She was part of the team, and more than that, she was part of his plan. When they entered the shed, the intense smell of crushed grapes, wood barrels, and metal machinery enveloped the senses. Bastien leaned on the railing of the staircase that led to the upper platform, from where the entire structure could be seen. Are you thinking of staying? Sydney turned to face him. Staying where? Here with me at the winery, as a partner, as whatever you want to be. She blinked, surprised. It wasn't the kind of question she expected to hear that afternoon, and he wasn't the kind of man who spoke carelessly. Are you serious? I've never been more serious in my life. Bastien, I have a life in San Francisco. College, an internship, the restaurant. That's where my home is, and I don't want to take that from you. I'm not asking you to choose between your career and the winery. I'm offering you something new, something that's yours, something you can build your own way, from the ground up, with me. She stepped away slightly, walking over to the nearest barrel. She touched the smooth wood, trying to organize her thoughts. You know this changes everything, right? I know, and that's why I'm saying it now. Because I don't want you to feel like an accessory in my story. I want this to be your story too. She looked at him again. There were no romantic pleas, no drama. Just a man saying what he felt with conviction. A man who didn't need to prove his masculinity with big words, but with presence, with consistency. I need time, she said honestly. This is too big to decide overnight. Of course, take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know the door is open. The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet ease. They worked together, tasted grapes, took notes. That night, after a simple dinner at the cottage next to the winery, they sat on the porch with glasses of white wine and bare feet. The sky was clear. Millions of stars seemed to be falling around them. When are you going back to the city? He asked after a while. Early tomorrow. I have class in the afternoon. And Julio wants to go over the new menu at the restaurant. They're changing everything. Do you plan on going back there after graduation? She thought for a moment. I don't know. I used to think it was the only possible path. But now, other doors have opened. And that's a little scary. What are you afraid of? She turned her face toward him. Of losing myself. Of stopping being who I am just to fit into a life that isn't mine. And with you, everything feels too intense, too fast. He took her hand gently. Then, take it slow. No one here is in a rush. I just want to be where you are. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warm touch of his hand on hers. That was it. The security, the steadiness, the peace of knowing this wasn't a passing fantasy, that it had roots, substance, presence. You're a complicated man, Bastien Rowe, and you're the clearest woman I've ever known, she laughed. That's not true, but it's nice to hear. It is true, you see me, and you make me see you too, all of you. The kiss that followed wasn't rushed. It wasn't impulsive, it was simple, right, inevitable, as if time had been waiting for that exact moment. And there, in the quiet dark of Napa, with the fields sleeping around them, the two came together not as opposites attracting, but as two worlds that had finally met halfway. Not submission, not domination, partnership. Truths spoken calmly, desires that didn't need to be shouted. It was love in the shape of balance. The restaurant door opened with the soft chime of a bell, and a gust of cold wind swept through the dining room, carrying with it the scent of morning and a reverent hush. Sydney walked in with confident steps, her eyes scanning the familiar space that somehow felt different now. It wasn't Pacific Ember that had changed, it was her. She wore grey tailored pants, a black turtleneck, and her hair in a casual bun. Instead of an apron, she carried a tablet and a folder filled with documents. It was her first day in her new role, wine consultant for the restaurant's new wine list. Julio appeared from the back of the room, wearing his usual dark blazer, but with a smile she hadn't seen in a long time. "You're early," he said, crossing his arms as he saw her. "Old habits," Sydney replied, smiling back. He walked closer, studying her for a moment, like someone seeing a person who had grown up too fast. "I never thought you'd come back with a different badge." "Neither did I," she admitted. "But here I am." "And are you sure you want to be on this side of the story?" he asked, teasing. "No tray, no tables to clean, no difficult customers." "I'm sure I'll still get tough questions about labels and pairings," she said with a sly smile. "But at least now I'll be answering them with a bit more authority." They laughed together, and then, as if acknowledging a fresh start, Julio simply nodded. "The chef is waiting for you in the kitchen, wants to go over the wine pairings for the new menu." Sydney thanked him and headed toward the kitchen. On the way, she passed Lila, who gave her a tight hug. "I'm still not used to seeing you without the apron," her friend said, a little emotional. "Neither am I," Sydney replied, "but I'm trying." Later, after the meeting with the chef and the team, she sat at one of the outdoor tables she used to serve dozens of guests at every night. Now she looked out over the city with a different gaze, not one of service but of creation. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message. "Bastian. I just got to San Francisco, meeting at 3 p.m. at the hotel. Can I swing by after?" She smiled. "Sydney, come by. I'll show you the place where it all began. And the table where you tried to teach me how to pronounce Margot." The reply came quickly. "Bastian, I'll pretend that didn't hurt. See you soon, Sid." She laughed, setting the phone aside. The sun was beginning to rise between the buildings, casting long shadows over the still empty tables. This, she thought, was more than an ending. It was a turning point. Over the past few months, she had learned to trust her instincts, her voice, her ability to take up space in rooms that once felt too far away. She no longer had to hide her knowledge or shrink herself to fit in small places. The day she returned from Napa, the decision was clear. It wasn't about choosing between Bastian and her career. It was about inclusion, integration, not giving up who she was, but also not denying what she felt. The winery was doing well. The first batch she and Bastian had signed off on was set to hit the market next season, with a limited release and its own distinct identity. The name of the line, Between the Lines, a tribute to unspoken gestures, silences full of meaning, the pauses that had built what they had together. And the relationship? It wasn't the fairy tale everyone imagined. There were no dinners drenched in cliches or over-the-top declarations. There was truth, commitment, and above all, choice. The daily choice to walk together, with space to grow as individuals and as partners. Sometimes he spent days wrapped up in meetings and travel, she immersed in tastings, reports, classes, and consulting work. But when they met at the vineyard, the hotel, or her home, over pasta and wine, it all made sense. And now there, sitting in the restaurant where it all began, Sydney realized just how much she had accomplished. Not just Bastian's respect or her colleagues' recognition, but something deeper. Self-trust. The certainty that she could build any path, so long as she didn't have to dim her light to do it. Julio walked by, leaving an envelope on the table. This came in early today, from Napa. She opened it and found a small glass bottle, unlabeled, and a handwritten note. "First signed blend, proof of trust, waiting for you to label it together. B." She held the bottle in her hands, the glass warm under the sun. She smiled to herself. Yes, she had plans. Yes, she had goals. But now, she also had a space where all of that could fit, and someone who not only understood it, but rooted for her to go even further. The wind blew again, this time softer, like a silent blessing. Sydney leaned back in her chair and looked out at the city with new eyes. And there, between certainties and possibilities, she knew this was only the beginning. Hear what it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.